The best meat to eat on a Mediterranean diet is not fish. It's so easy to think that Mediterranean, it means I need to eat a lot of salmon, I need to eat a lot of sardines, I need to eat a lot of shellfish. And yes, that stuff's great, but there's also a lot of question nowadays as to what is safe to eat. Is there radiation? Is there mercury? Are there contaminants? Is it really as good as we once thought it was? Or is it really as good now as it was even 20 years ago? But all that aside, for so many years, we used to say, okay, the Mediterranean diet is healthy because they do not eat red meat. I've always thought that that was a little bit misleading. As someone that follows Mediterranean principles quite a bit, I eat a decent amount of red meat. So what do we need to really be looking at here? What should you do, and what is the best meat on a Mediterranean diet? Well, it turns out there was a study to investigate just this, and it really clarifies a lot of what I thought and ameliorates some of my concerns. So this study was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and it took a look at a Mediterranean diet with two different meat categories. Mediterranean diet with a high amount of lean red meat and some pork, 500 grams, okay? And then they took a look at a Mediterranean diet that had 200 grams of lean red meat and pork with 300 grams of poultry. Now we're talking volume, weight, not 300 grams of protein, right? Okay, so what they found with this is that the Mediterranean group with the lean red meat had better cholesterol levels and lower LDL than the group that had the lower red meat. So what's the deal here? Well, when you're following Mediterranean principles, it's a relatively lower saturated fat diet anyway. It just naturally is that way. But that automatically gets people to think they can't eat red meat, because when people think red meat, they just think ribeye or they think brisket. But there's almost more cuts of red meat that are lean than there are cuts of red meat that are fatty. And red meat itself is one of the most nutritious things you could consume. There's tons of vitamins, tons of minerals. There's heme iron in it that is really only available in good quality sources of meat like that. So why would we ever demonize it? Well, unfortunately, the data would get construed, okay? Because if you're taking people that are consuming high amounts of carbohydrates alongside high amounts of saturated fat, carnivore is a different exception, okay? Making that very clear. But in this particular case, high carbs and high saturated fat, that can be a bigger problem for insulin resistance. Okay, that does affect things. So unfortunately, red meat gets roped into the saturated fat category automatically. Whereas if you look at the fatty acid profile of red meat, unless you're choosing a fattier cut, it's actually pretty decent plethora of poly and monounsaturated fats too. And a lot of them, like a filet, is really low fat to begin with. I popped the link down below if you want to check out some of the red meat options from ButcherBox. There's a grass-fed, grass-finished meat delivery company. So definitely do check them out. It's worth checking out for sure. And even if you do like the fattier cuts, like the ribeyes and stuff like that, they have them too, but they also have bison, which is a little bit leaner. And then they have a bunch of wild-caught seafood options as well. So it gets delivered right to your doorstep. But the bottom line is you can get meat anywhere. This stuff just tastes unbelievable, like so freaking good, especially their fillets, because usually fillets, they're lean and you got to make sure you cook them right. Their fillets are very forgiving. I find I can cook them and even I don't mess them up. So that link is down below and it gets delivered right to your doorstep. It's called ButcherBox and you can just choose whatever cuts you want. You can also choose the cuts that I choose if you're interested in what I pick. So that link down below this video in the first line of the description. So cholesterol is one thing. That's cool, all right? But there were no differences in other markers with this study. So no change in triglycerides, no change in blood pressure, no changes in glucose. So the red meat didn't have a negative impact. Again, we are sometimes throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Unfortunately, some people don't want to hear it, high amounts of saturated fat with high amounts of carbohydrates are probably not a good thing. And when you're looking at a Mediterranean diet traditionally, it's decently high in carbs too. So if someone's like, hey, I'm following a Mediterranean diet and then I throw a ribeye on top of my pasta, you're going to have a problem and you're probably going to change your blood markers. But if you're choosing these leaner cuts, then it makes a lot more sense. So what should your Mediterranean profile look like in this particular case. You're choosing red meat, you're not eating as much fish. Yeah, that's great. Well, maybe you have like some lean ground beef. Go to the store, get a 93% lean ground beef. Maybe you can make a delicious burger that normally wouldn't be on a Mediterranean diet. One of the things that I like to do, I like to make a lean ground beef burger with a little bit of feta or a little bit of like pecorino romano or some other aged cheese. I'll put like an olive tapenade on it. I'll put a little bit of maybe even some hummus. So I'll create a Mediterranean burger. Or if you like red meat, you can go with lamb. Lamb is a big one in Greece and Turkey, right? They eat a fair bit of that. So that might be a decent red meat that you can add into the mix that can sometimes be a little bit leaner and better with like a lamb burger sort of thing. But what does the rest of your diet look like? Just so that you have an idea, because I don't want to just leave you hanging with just video that says, hey, red meat's good, see you later. You want to choose the leaner cuts whenever possible. Okay, I don't care what diet you're doing. I think it just leaves you a lot more slack and flexibility with your diet because you're not making up calories with just appendaged fat that's hanging on a piece of meat, okay? But you do want to be choosing fruits and vegetables that are going to have the highest antioxidant components, okay? So you want things like berries that are rich in anthocyanins, rich in the antioxidants. That's how you kind of follow these Mediterranean principles. But another piece, if you are going to choose the red meat route, I highly recommend that you follow some kind of time-restricted feeding approach. That's a big staple for the Mediterranean, right? They really don't graze throughout the day. They have very clear defined times in which they eat. And the American College of Cardiology had actually made a mention in a study that the Mediterranean diet naturally sort of follows intermittent fasting. Like they take like a 14-hour break from food naturally, and they don't even think about it. They might wake up and have a shot of espresso or something and then not eat until a little bit later. So you're granted a lot more slack and amnesty with your diet when that is in place, when you're not just eating all the time. So you take that Mediterranean approach, and any potential negative drawback of the red meat can actually be countered by the time-restricted feeding and countered by the antioxidants in the fruits and vegetables that you're consuming. There's actually data to back that up too. I need to pull that study, but it basically demonstrated that red meat consumption is not as big of a deal if you have the antioxidants coming in from fruits and vegetables. So we're starting to see the light here that maybe red meat hasn't been bad all along, and it does fit into a Mediterranean lifestyle a little bit more. I'll see you tomorrow.